The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. Dan Barry of the New York Times wrote a great piece today about Rick Welts, the president and CEO of the Phoenix Suns, who revealed that he's gay and that he wants to mentor other gay people who want to pursue a career in sports. Rick has been working in the NBA in various capacities for more than 3 decades. He's the most prominent executive in men's sports to come out, and he is on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline right now. What's happening?
How are we doing?
Tell me what the last 24 hours was like.
Oh my gosh, Bill. This all kind of hit when I was about 40,000 feet up in the air coming from the West Coast yesterday, and I knew that was going to happen, and it was about 2 hours before I touched down at JFK, and took one deep breath and turned the BlackBerry back on again, and it kind of exploded with just unbelievable messages from people I've worked with and friends and family, and I was pretty much an emotional wreck by the time I got to the gate. You
had been planning this for, is it fair to say, like 2 months you'd been thinking about doing this? No, it really probably started about a year ago. I had an 85-year-old mother who has since passed away, who I really wanted to have the discussion with first because, I really felt that if there was any, hesitation at her end, whether for me or for her, that that would be the end of the story. But really got a wonderful blessing from her, and then started to really think about talking to my friends about it. Pretty split opinion amongst my friends whether I was doing something terrific or whether I was crazy. Why did they think you were crazy? Because they thought it would hurt you professionally? No, more that, look, you got a great life. You get to do anything you want to do. You've got a wonderful career. Why would you really want to subject yourself to this? And I think the catalyst for coming to the answer to that question was probably in January when I was here in New York, having dinner with a friend who's in the media business who I really trust his judgment. And I just asked him, I said, there's a couple ways to go about doing this. I could have, a personal conversation with all these amazing people I've worked with, and that would take care of my feeling comfortable in my work environment issue. But is there something that really could be more meaningful beyond that if I chose to make this a much more public story? And, from that dinner on, it kind of evolved that really there might be an opportunity to be a catalyst for some discussion about something which is just not discussed in men's team sports. It needs to be. So if you had to break it down, how would you rank the factors of just wanting people to know who you were and what your real life was like, and then also the kind of impact you wanted to make on other people who are facing that choice? Well, really the only real reason that I would take the course that I took was the hope, and I guess it's yet to be seen whether or not telling my story in such a public way really could make a difference to some young person out there who, whether it's team sports or not, is questioning whether or not they can be successful in following their passion just based on who they are. And, if my story in some way encourages them to follow that passion, then I think it's worth it. You had, when did you first start working for the Sonics? Was that mid-'70s? I hate to admit it because it's going to define my age, but it was actually 1969. Ooh. 16-year-old Queen Anne High School student. My big career break was that Earl Woodson, who was the coolest kid at Queen Anne High, was a ball boy for the Sonics, and he and I were pretty good friends, and his family moved out of town, so I conned him into taking me down to meet Jack Curran, the trainer of the Sonics, and I got hired as ball boy, so that was my big career break. And then what was your first job like within a team? I thought after I graduated from high school, my career was probably over because you're too old to be a ball boy. But fortunately, while I was attending the University of Washington, the team hired me to work in the PR office, and then I eventually got my dream job, the one I thought would be kind of my ultimate accomplishment if I could ever get it, which was
to be public relations director. We called it then media relations director of the Sonics, which, I was only in that job for 2 years. We managed to go to the NBA Finals both those years and win a championship in 1979.
Ooh, you still have your ring?
I do.
Oh.
I do have my ring.
Freddie, downtown Freddie Brown, his ring is on like eBay or one of those auction sites right now.
He's blaming his wife for that she's raising money for charity, and that he didn't really know about it till somebody told him. I heard the last bid is $44,000, so I'd encourage people. It's for a good cause, I guess. So.
And another one, I think another one went for sale in I think a Great Flannels auction or something. And it went for in the 80s, I think.
Well, I'm not sure mine would fetch quite the same price, but I'm kind of attached to it, actually.
Right? Yeah, keep that thing.
I think so.
So when you started working for the NBA, and we exchanged a couple emails I think after I was working on my book, because you were the guy who gave us All-Star Weekend, basically. Well,
I get all the credit for it, and the truth be told, it was really out of my intense desire to continue to be employed. I had my job was to go out and talk, first person at the NBA to go out and talk to companies about investing marketing dollars in the NBA, and I'd come from Seattle where, we'd won a championship. I thought the NBA was the number one sport in the world, and to come to New York and find out in the early 80s that it was probably the most poorly thought of sport amongst the professional sports leagues, and it was not easy. So I didn't have a round-trip ticket, so I had no choice but to stay here. And then Stern had actually been elected commissioner and was going to take office at the end of the All-Star game in Denver in 1984 in February, and had announced that he really wanted to get back in touch with the history of the game. And, I was sitting in my hotel room, watching whatever would have been before SportsCenter in that year, and saw an old 60-year-old guy get up and hit a home run in a Major League Baseball old-timers game over a Cracker Jack sign. I thought, aha, we got something there. And then Denver, as you know, had a rich ABA heritage, and we were going back to Denver. And the most famous thing that ever happened in the ABA, I swear, is the ABA Slam Dunk Contest, which took place in Denver in 1976 when this young guy, Julius Erving, you may have heard of, won the Slam Dunk Contest. And we were going back to Denver, and Carl Scheer, who was the general manager there, was in love with the idea of, recreating that ABA contest. So kind of took that idea and the old-timers idea to Stern and said, why don't we create a second day, because I actually think I could sell this stuff to sponsors and keep my job. And kind of what unfolded there was, it's much better to be lucky than good, and you've seen what it's grown into today.
Well, I wrote in my book, because, or at least the reporting that was done at the time, was that the commissioner before Stern was this guy named Lawrence O'Brien, who I did not think did a very good job as commissioner. And when your team pitched this to him, his attitude was basically, whatever, if you can get it sponsored, do it, I don't care. Yeah, that's not accurate, or that's accurate?
Well, I think it was more like, it's my last weekend in office, don't embarrass me, and it can't cost the NBA a penny. So with that ringing endorsement, we went to work.
It can't cost the NBA a penny. Right. That's great. And that's turned into one of the signature, events in the league. And think about how many dunks you gave the world.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing to look back on.
So when, obviously at some point you must have been thinking, all right, well, here I am, I'm living a gay life, and I'm working with all these people. There's no arena more homophobic than the sports world. In the New York Times article, it was written about your partner at the time, Arnie, who died in 1994. That was somebody you were with for how many years?
17.
How did you keep that secret for that long, or did you?
I did. It was just something that I didn't really have another way to deal with it other than to just go to work and try to do the best I could to get through the day. And, it was something I certainly wouldn't wish on anybody to have to do that, grieving in such privacy and try to maintain a facade of normalcy in the midst of something as devastating as that. But I didn't know how else to deal with it at that point.
And then David Stern in this story, it was really touching that he, without ever really acknowledging that he knew what was going on, he sent you, a pretty big gift for the wake or the funeral. I forget what the detail was.
It was pretty remarkable. I'd only run one obituary in my hometown and in Arnie's hometown of Seattle, and had gone back there and a whole stack of envelopes on the plane flying back to New York, and there was one from Scarsdale, New York, and it was from David and Diane Stern for $10,000, which was just amazing. Wow. And, I went into his office the next day and we couldn't really talk about it, but kind of said thanks and did the guy thing and kind of said, hey, we'll talk about it sometime. Of course, we never had until just last month.
And then a few years before, Magic had tested positive for HIV, and one of the subplots of that was, well, how did he get it? Was he gay? Yeah. And there was that famous talk show appearance when he went on Arsenio Hall's show, and Arsenio asked him, we got to cover this. Are you gay? And Magic's like, no, I'm not gay. And the studio audience, applauds like it's this fantastic thing that he's not gay. What were your feelings when you watched that?
Well, it was one of the most amazing little 2-week periods of my life. I've never been more proud of being a part of the NBA than kind of from the time we found out what the story was, that we had several days until Magic actually made his announcement. And, what we had to learn about the disease, we didn't know that much about it. We had to try to figure out if it was safe for him to play. We had to try to help him craft what he was going to say. It was really, a situation room, it was unbelievable. And, I hear what you're saying. I think I understand it. I guess there's a huge disappointment that, and relief when somebody who you love and respect as an athlete is not gay. But I think we've progressed a lot since, 1991 when that happened. I think it's a different time in our society. It, unfortunately, is not that different a time in men's team sports, and I guess that's what all this is really about.
When did you, what year did you start thinking it's possible that society has moved into a place where I can say who I am without fearing a big backlash?
Yeah, I don't think I defined it as much by outside events as I did just my own personal journey. So I think it was much more how I felt and what I felt about myself and to grow as a person and what I needed to do and to try to conquer some fears that had been with me. Obviously, society was changing, so that was the backdrop, but I wasn't really tying it to any, outside events that told me that the time was right.
Got it. So, because I think one of the remarkable things about this story is the attitude, or at least from what I could gather from just Googling it, trying to read up on what people were tweeting about it and the emails that my friends were sending me, things like that, is that people don't really care. It's like, well, that's great. You have a ton of courage to come out, but there's no backlash with this. And that makes me wonder, in 2011, have we finally hit a really good place? Maybe.
I guess for me that story will be defined quite clearly over the next, weeks, months, and years. But that would certainly be a hope. And, if it turns out to be that way, maybe some other people will feel more comfort in their own stories to be able to share them as well.
And I emailed you yesterday because I had, two members of my own family that came out way back when it was a much more difficult time, I think. And, I think what gets lost in all this, because it's been this theme that's in TV and movies and has been for the last decade. And I don't want to say it's become cliched, but we see it so often that you kind of forget sometimes what a huge personal thing this is and how scary it is for the person who's doing it.
It is, and part of it with me is a big decision. A lot of it's become kind of, you said cliche. It's kind of a way to reinvent a career that has maybe fallen a little bit by the wayside, because all of a sudden you can be hip and relevant again in many industries by deciding you're gay. Doing it when you're at least arguably at the peak of your profession, is another factor to kind of put into the mix here when I was trying to make my decision.
What did David Stern tell you when you talked to him?
It was early on a Monday morning. We, sat in the same office we'd sat in thousands of times before, and it was, it was one of my best friends and my mentor, talking about something that we knew had been in the room in every one of those conversations, but we never, either one of us, felt the comfort in discussing. So it was about as easy and comfortable I knew it would be, just because he is who he is. And despite that guy that sometimes gets portrayed as perhaps a little volatile and a little emotional, he is, truly one of the most compassionate people I've ever met, and somebody that has always been not only a great boss, but a great friend and mentor to me. So it was great. It couldn't have been better.
What was the best case that somebody that you trusted made to you that you shouldn't come out?
Just, that there is inevitable risk, and that, when you are in a position where life is awfully good and you're in a great job with great organization and doing what you always dreamed of all your life, is it really something you want to put into play by making this part of the storyline when you don't need to? And that I heard that, but I think on the other side of the argument, as we discussed, if there really was the opportunity to do something a little bigger than just me and have an influence or help some young person who's just kind of petrified right now about whether or not they can do what they love, then wow, that's got to be worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking about, let's say you did this in 2007. I think it's maybe a bigger deal. Maybe people are a little more shocked or whatever. Yeah. And now in 2011, I did this podcast with LZ Granderson a couple months ago after a sports writer named Steve Buckley came out. Yeah. And my theory was that we went from thinking, well, no athlete, especially no, name athlete or whoever would ever dare to do it. And now I feel like, why wouldn't they? It's like, beyond the part that we discussed about it's just so scary to actually do that and make that leap, I don't feel like there would be career repercussions for a major athlete to come out. Do you feel like there would be or not?
I agree with you. The problem is there's nobody to point to that, somebody who's trying to make that decision can say, see, that it's okay. So whoever makes that first decision is going to be incredibly courageous, because careers are short and endorsements are hard to come by, and your next contract is still a ways away, and to be able to take that step, it'll be very courageous.
So is it fair to say that it's almost like baby steps? Like each person that comes forward makes it a little easier for the next person, and like Steve Buckley comes forward a couple months ago, you do, like the more this happens, the more that's going to loosen it up for somebody to just say, you know what, I'm 32 years old. I got 4 years left in the league. This is a chance for me to kind of affect people the way that you want to affect people by coming out. That it seems like a realistic scenario.
I think so. And I think, people who are really afraid of it it's born out of ignorance and not knowing anybody. I mean, that was the most amazing thing back when Magic was such the focal point of a worldwide discussion of HIV/AIDS. Yeah. No one had ever known anybody. No one had ever known somebody that they liked and respected, and wow, it put a human face on what had just been a fear before. And I think the more human faces we can put on things that our life experience, we don't know as well, it becomes easier, more manageable to deal with it in some kind of intelligent way. How
homophobic is the whole sports world right now compared to where we were 10 years ago?
I think, my perspective is NBA, which I think for a lot of reasons that I have always thought it's kind of more reflective of today's culture than any of the other leagues. So I would say...
Hey, hold on. Explain that. Why do you think...
Well, because I think the long-standing success of Major League Baseball and the NFL in particular, at the time I joined the NBA, there were 35 people working, for the NBA. When I left, there were over 1,000 working all over the world. Yeah. I mean, all of our growth came in a much more contemporary setting where I think the people, even their age, their backgrounds, their ethnicities, I mean, it just represents a much more diverse picture that looks a lot more like America today than the other sports from an administrative side, just because we didn't have a 100-year history of being successful. Because of that, I think there's an openness, on issues like this that probably the other leagues are going to struggle with a little bit more. So, from an administrative side, I don't think there's ever been open hostility here on this subject. I just think there's this kind of conspiracy of silence where it's just hard to talk about. And if there are opportunities like me or even Kobe going off, where people can talk about it, I think that's a big step.
Let's talk about that, because right as you're basically deciding to take the plunge with this whole thing, the Kobe incident happens. Almost crazy how the timing was.
Incredible.
Tell that whole story that day.
Yeah, you could not even, no one would believe it if it didn't really happen the way it happened. On the Monday of that week, I had my morning meeting with Stern, and then I got back on a plane and flew back to Phoenix. The next day, Tuesday, I walk in and I'm like, oh, that's right. We're filming a PSA in the arena today. The NBA had set up totally apart from my involvement, and it was Grant Hill and Jared Dudley and a group of, young kids playing basketball when one of them, suggests that the move is gay, and Jared and Grant, say, whoa, you don't understand what that word means and the impact it has, and you can't use the word that way, or you're stupid and you're hurting people. And, actually that started airing yesterday, which is ironic as well. But then that night, after the shooting of the PSA, the day after I met with Stern, Kobe went off, and then Wednesday, Stern fired him. So I had a pretty unusual little vantage point of what that week was like, and I honestly, knowing David and knowing the NBA, I do not believe there was any connection between my meeting and the punishment that they decided on Wednesday. In fact, Stern would be really insulted if I even suggested that, and I don't think it's true. But the coincidence of the timing was really quite remarkable.
Did the response to what he said make you feel a little better about what you were going to do?
I think he genuinely regretted what he had done. I think, we're in a world where handlers and PR people carefully craft the mea culpas when we go astray. So, I believe he's sincere, and I believe he regrets it very much. And, in some way it's another conversation starter about the subject, and for that I think it probably did some good.
Tell me what your reaction was when you heard that he said it.
Having been around the intensity of the NBA game, and knowing the passion that a player like Kobe has and the frustration when something happens that isn't the way you want it to, you could just, the filters somehow all that are normally there just disappear, and you kind of reach down to think of the most hurtful thing that you could possibly say to somebody in that situation, and those are the words that came out. So, as much progress as we hope we've made, that's kind of unfortunately, I think, is kind of the unveiled innermost visceral reaction, which says we still have a ways to go.
Yeah. What about this latest brouhaha with the gay marriage stuff with the NHL? Have you been following that?
Just what I'm reading online or in the paper. So it's I don't know that it's a brouhaha. I think it's kind of interesting to see people step forward in all walks of life and support marriage equality. That I apply. I've never really understood where the asterisk was placed in the word equal. So it's always been a hard thing for me to understand.
Yeah. Well, I guess because some people incredibly step forward with this dissenting opinion. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that was a great idea on their part, but that's what. And then the backlash to that, and then turning this whole thing, and it's been going on for what has it been? 2 weeks now?
Yeah. Well, one of the people I heard from was Gary Bettman over the last 48 hours too. He's a great friend, and
oh, you worked with him?
Yeah, we worked together at the NBA when he was general counsel at the NBA, and he's remained a really close friend in his role at the NHL. So I got a wonderful email from Gary today too.
And they also had Brian Burke, who's the Maple Leafs general manager now. His son had come out, and his son died in a car accident, and Brian Burke's done a ton for for gay rights and things like that, and speaking out and
I
being very inclusive.
I've really only met Brian a couple times, but I got an unbelievable email from Brian, and then one from one of his kids.
Oh, great!
Yesterday, sometime in the last 24 hours as well. That was incredibly heartfelt and supportive, and it's such a tragic story. And Brian's such an amazing guy, and again, not somebody you'd come out of Central Casting to think would be such an advocate for this cause, but he's quite a guy.
So walk me through the next month. What do you think happens?
I have no idea.
What do you want to happen?
I want the experience to guide me. I had no preconceived. I've spent so much time and energy getting to this conversation we're having today that I really, beyond that, just decided, you know what, I'm going to let reaction, the events that happen, kind of guide me and kind of feel like, where is there more for me to do here? Is this my 15 minutes of fame? I don't know. I am overwhelmed by the response to this point, which I think encourages me to figure out some way to stay active in this or a related cause. But it's way too early for me to have an answer to that question.
When you say you want to help people who are facing the same struggles that you faced and who are obviously younger and maybe people thinking of getting in the sports business or whatever, it would seem like the best way for you to help them would be to just keep the door open for these people.
I think so. And I've already had, my email address is not hard to figure out. I've already had, some really wonderful emails from people I don't know who express, their own situations and, their own struggles, and that they found some encouragement in reading the story, and that feels great. And who wouldn't want to continue to have that be part of their lives if you have the ability to make a difference with some of those people.
All right, so if talking about how you're going to be remembered someday, would you want this to be the first thing, or would you go with All-Star Weekend, or would you go with branding Dream Team in '92?
I really had always thought the latter several would be the case, but as a wise media guru here in New York told me the day we were having this discussion, he says, well, you know what your obituary is going to say now. So
right.
I guess I've signed up for it.
Tell me about the Dream Team thing quickly.
Oh my gosh. It was, it'll be looked back at the most important event in the development of the game of basketball ever, because it moved the world's basketball agenda ahead 20 years in that 2 weeks in Barcelona. It was the most remarkable experience ever to be, walking through the streets of Barcelona with, a Charles Barkley, as you would have thought, whatever the 1992 equivalent of the Beatles was, with crowds surrounding the hotels and, people just waiting to get a glimpse of the best collection of 12 athletes ever put together in a team sport in the Olympics. And, it moved the NBA, only in the United States. I mean, I always am amazed at this. There was really a sense that it wasn't playing fair, that somehow sending our best athletes to compete in the Olympics in basketball was un-American, because we were just we were too good. It wasn't fair. Hard to reconcile with track and field or swimming or, any of the other events where that wouldn't sound real logical, but the rest of the world embraced it and embraced the sport of basketball in a way that allowed the NBA's international agenda to grow dramatically. And the young NBA players that are starting to come into our league from countries outside the United States, I mean, the influence that had in making the NBA truly a global game, it can't be underestimated. And I think, the crazy thing about basketball compared to the biggest world game, which is what everyone else calls football, soccer, is that every kid around the world grows up dreaming to play for their local club team in soccer, or their national team. And the World Cup would be the ultimate. Every kid in the world growing up with a basketball in his hand dreams of playing in one league, which is the NBA, which is the absolutely extraordinary advantage the NBA has in taking its sport worldwide, because, that's where every kid who aspires to be a great player wants to play.
Did you come up with the Dream Team moniker?
No, that actually belongs to Sports Illustrated. We secretly shot a cover photo at the All-Star game that, I'll forget somebody, but I know Patrick Ewing, Karl Malone, Magic, Michael, and...
I think Bird was in it.
And Bird were on the cover, and some headline writer at Sports Illustrated came up with a headline that said, "Look out, world, this could be America's dream team." And from that day, that just stuck. And it was nothing that any brilliant advertising agency or smart people at the NBA invented. It was just when it was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, it became synonymous with the team.
So you just wrote it. It was like, that's a good one. Let's ride that one.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you wrote it to Dream Team 2, which I'll never forgive the NBA for. There's only one Dream Team ever.
It was, if we'd had a better perspective, what happened in Barcelona could never ever be equal any other time.
Well, that was my number one choice when we were playing in the 30 for 30 series. I wanted it so bad, and we're still trying to figure it out. And I do think there's a good chance we're going to come up with it because, the NBA was there the whole time. They filmed everything. They have a crazy security camera footage apparently of all the scrimmages, or most of them, including the famous one where they just started to go at it. Yeah. They were following, Barkley through all these different European cities and Monte Carlo, and I just think I can't imagine a better way to spend 2 hours in front of a television set than watching that. So hopefully,
if you could really capture what happened there, it would be spellbinding.
And you were there the whole time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we're in the whole time leading up to it, obviously, but then in Barcelona the whole time.
All right, give me your best story then.
I don't, just...
Come on.
No, watching Barkley wander through the streets of Barcelona with literally, as the Pied Piper. I mean, he relished, Charles, he relished the attention, and he was like the biggest rock star, Europe had ever seen. And it was just fun to see that. I guess the whole experience, I don't know if you remember, we had to stage the United States had not qualified for the Olympics in 92. Yep. And we had to go to Portland, Oregon. We actually had to buy a tournament that was supposed to take place in South America, stage it in Portland, that would have our zone's teams compete for the last spot in the Olympic tournament. And, the unbelievable, memories of these teams from Central and South America coming out on the court with their cameras. Instead of getting ready to do battle and win a game, it was more about who could get their picture taken with Magic Johnson. So you kind of knew there was something going on there that was a little different than most athletic endeavors.
Right. All right. Well, Rick Welts, I applaud you for doing this. I think it's going to be hugely important. I told you this in an email yesterday. I think I think you're going to do a lot of good with this, and I think you're going to make it easier for some people out there who may be on the fence or struggling with who they are and all that stuff. And the more people that do this, the less that's going to happen. So good luck dealing with all those emails, and I'm sure you're going to get some heartfelt ones over the next few days.
Yeah.
And weeks.
Absolutely.
But will you come back and check in with us in a couple months?
I'd be honored. Thanks, Bill.
All right, great. Good luck, Rick.
Okay.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at PodCenter at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.